I'm probably bringing back some unsavory memories for a lot of you. I know I don't like seeing these forms again, and for those of you who don't know what this is, which you're lucky, this is a Scantron form. You meticulously bubble in your answers for a multiple choice test, and it presumably gets fed into some machine that automatically grades it. I've always wondered what that machine looks like and how it works. I mean, that's quite the name, Scantron. Luckily, I have one of those machines. This model was released in the late 90s, but some machines date back to 1972. Schools absolutely loved these, especially in America, because it made grading exponentially easier and quicker. It could take a multi-day ordeal and turn it into 15 minutes. So how did this work, and why did I have to use a number 2 pencil? I just need to show you how fast it can grade tests before we continue. This is a 20 question test, which would take a few minutes to grade, especially if the student got a lot of answers wrong. But with the Scantron, yep, in about a second, it just graded the whole test, marked the incorrect answers, and indicated the correct answer, and calculated a percentage grade. There's no connection to a computer, no software, just 2 switches on the front. So this is the Scantron 888P Plus. This relatively boring looking machine can grade up to 40 tests per minute, or 2,400 tests per hour. Before we start opening up the machine and all that, let's look at the process of creating a test. Generally, the teacher's going to hand out both a blank Scantron form and all the questions. The questions are probably in a big packet, and it's a class copy that gets reused over and over again until someone draws something obscene on it. It can be split up into multiple choice and free response questions, but the Scantron can only grade multiple choice, or true-false. The student reads the question off the class copy and marks their answers on a blank form. I'll fill out one of those forms so we can grade the test. Let me just pull up a chair. There's actually a lot to look at on this one form, but we'll come back to most of this later. For now, let's just start by filling out the information on the right side. This whole area is out of view from the scanner, so you can put whatever markings you want. Generally, your name, subject, class, whatever. Now, before you take the test, you might want to look at this important section. Everything it says here just adds to the anxiety of test day. You can only use number 2 pencils. You have to make sure the marks are dark enough, but if you change your answer, you have to erase it sufficiently. You also have to mark perfectly within the box. Now, I will be testing these claims out later in the video to see how tolerant the scanner actually is, and I'm hoping I didn't waste any energy worrying about upsetting the Scantron. Okay, now we're ready to take the test. You get your class copy of the questions and start filling out answers. Over and over again, for every single question. And you have to make sure you didn't skip a question or skip a line because all your answers would be offset and you'd have to erase everything. And you'd have to make sure you erase completely. You can see why some people didn't like taking these tests. Anyway, after you've guessed on half the answers and hope for the best, you turn in the questions and your answers in separate piles to the front of the class and you're done. You'll hypothetically get your answers back by the next class if your teacher's on top of it. Now, let's take a look at the teacher's side of things. At the end of the day, they scoop up the pile of Scantron forms and take it to the Scantron room, the magical room with the machine that you have to please in order to pass the class. I always envisioned it being the size of a commercial laserjet printer and needing a 20 amp plug for some reason. And I remember my teacher saying it'll just spit out your test if you wrote with ink or had invalid markings. It kinda made the machine seem evil, but it's just this little guy with a cute buzzer that sounds like Roadrunner. It also, for some reason, pulls 80 watts at all times, but we'll look into that later. Programming the correct answers are actually very simple, and that's because this machine is very simple. The switch I flipped at the beginning is the power switch, but it's also the program mode. When you turn it on, it's already cleared and ready to be programmed. When you're done grading a test and you want to erase it, you flip the switch and it simply cuts the power. And the memory of the last test is consequently erased and it's ready to be programmed again. So let's do that. Again, I thought I would need some proprietary software to get the answer key into it, but you literally just use another form. As the teacher, you know the correct answers already, and simply fill out a blank form. The only difference is you bubble the key box in at the top. You'll also notice these other boxes. This top row of questions before the actual questions start is called the key line, and it's how you select options on how to grade the test. No matter what, you have to fill in number 5, the key indicator. This simply prints a numeric score of how many answers the student got correct. In addition to that, you can fill in number 2, which will verify the score, meaning it prints the correct answer for each question the student got wrong. This is alphabetic, meaning it prints A, B, C, D, or E, but if you fill in the 2 and 3, it will just do numeric. The last option is just filling in 3, which prints a serial number. This is a serial number for each test, which starts at 1 and increases for each test. Now, generally speaking, that's not super useful, but there is a special form you can use in conjunction with these where it is useful, which we'll cover later. Unfortunately, you can't verify answers and print a serial number, and that could just be a technical limitation, or more likely because those all get printed in the same space. Percentage can be used alongside one of those options, and it simply prints the percentage score on the test. So for this example, I'm going to do percentage, and I'll do verify alphabetic. And now we're ready to go. You first feed the answer key in to program the Scantron. There should be no beeps, just a click. If it beeps, that's the document alarm. Something's wrong with your key and you gotta check it. If we look at the form, it's printed that it counted 50 possible questions, but maybe the original test was 60 and I used the second side. What do I do now? On the other side of the answer key, you just gotta make sure the key line is marked with the same markings and feed it through again. But now it only says 10 possible questions. Don't worry, it did save both sides, and I can prove it to you by grading the first test. Once you feed the key through, it's automatically ready to grade. Just feed in the tests, making sure to follow the arrow along the bottom. After the first side, you'll notice it didn't print anything, because it's expecting a second side, and after you do that, then it prints the combined side 1 and side 2 score. So that's a pretty good system. It just works. This student did a very good job and got 100%. Let's see what happens when a student didn't do so hot. That was quite the racket, but it makes sense if you look at the student's test. Along the left side, there's a red mark for every single question the student got wrong. That's not it though, it also printed the correct answer next to every incorrect answer. And if you take a close look, you'll notice it's a dot matrix printer, the kind that are known for being loud. So when the test is graded and it's super loud like that, you know they probably failed. I'm going to grade a few more tests to get a good sample size, and you'll see why shortly. But it took me about 30 seconds to grade 4 more forms, which is way faster than hand grading. It'd be much faster if I didn't have to refeed the forms for the other side too. This thing absolutely flies through forms. Now that the whole class has been graded, I have a nice stack of tests. These machines are supposed to come with a little tray that the tests get thrown into, but I didn't get that. Anyway, before we turn off the machine and clear its memory, there's a different form I want to use. This is form 9702, the Scantron item analysis form. There's no setup required, and you can just insert this when you've gone through all the tests. And it's supposed to show the number of forms scored, the average score, and the number of responses that were incorrect. You can optionally fill in test information at the top and even write in some information about each question. Even though this is in the scan area, it just ignores it so you can have this filled out ahead of time. And that was super cool to hear the printer rapid firing. As expected, we can see the number of forms scored, the average score in percent, then the percentage of people who got that answer wrong. Now, that actually works in reverse of how you'd expect. I feel like you'd want to know the percent correct, but maybe it was a limitation of the Scantron. Anyway, front and back is a report for the overall score for the class. This is amazing. At a glance, you can see the average score and easily see if a question is missed most of the time, which could indicate a problem with the answer key or something. It worked great, and I'm surprised none of my teachers used it. I was more surprised that the Scantron had this functionality. It can obviously remember the key's answers, but it's also tallying the number of incorrect responses and storing them all in that short amount of time. But that's not all. There's also this class roster form. It prints the score that each student got. Whatever order you feed the tests in is the order it appears on the roster, so it simply spits out the scores in order of appearance. That's also good use for the serial number feature. Again, it numbers them starting at 1, and that matches up with the numbers on the roster. You can also do both the roster and analysis form if you want. The manual says that all the student information stays in memory until it's powered off, so you can do them back to back, or even again if you need copies. I also forgot to mention the subjective scoring feature. This would be used if you had another section of the test that wasn't multiple choice, like an essay or something. You can add up to 163 extra points that way. You just have to fill in the maximum number of subjective points on the answer key, and then fill in each student's form with the points that they scored. The machine then adds that to the total score. So that's the power of Scantron, but there's still more to talk about. I want to take a look inside and see what's going on under the hood, but we need to talk about these forms first. I have only ever seen forms like this, where there's 50 multiple choice questions with 5 answers each. This exact form is number 882-E, and this is an authentic, genuine Scantron form. But it wouldn't exactly be hard to recreate this form, and here's proof of that. I ordered 100 of this ScanRite brand on Amazon for 15 bucks. Scantron's official store will charge you double that for the same thing. The cost could add up over thousands of tests, and I'd imagine schools didn't always use genuine forms. And they didn't. This is a real test I took in 2019, and my school used AccuScan forms. Now, there's a chance that they were using the Apperson DataLink 600, which these forms were made for. It's a drop-in replacement for my machine. But my school didn't have a lot of money, so I think they had a Scantron and used these forms. And Scantron really wanted you to use their forms. The item analysis form has this big disclaimer about how reproduction of these forms can lead to civil penalties, criminal sanctions, or both. The machine itself has a big sticker saying that this machine is property of the Scantron Corporation and that only genuine forms can guarantee reliability. I don't know what high horse they were on because I own the machine and the knockoffs work just as well as the real deal. Until they didn't. When I was grading those tests earlier, I originally wanted to grade 30 of them. In fact, I hand-filled out 30 forms with 60 questions each just to get a huge sample size. But when I went to shoot that clip, the machine just kept rejecting the forms. But it worked fine in testing. I don't know what changed, and I don't know what the difference is between the forms, other than that the Scantron form is a little bit thinner paper. So maybe there is some merit to the 100% scannability guarantee of Scantron genuine forms. And another benefit to using their official forms is that you can sell them to your students. That's right, not only can you force them to take a Scantron test, but you can also profit off of them. They make little 6-packs of these tests that have a hang tag and everything so you can have them in the campus bookstore. Each form has a UPC on the back too, so you can sell them individually. And imagine this is more just to subsidize the cost of the form, but still interesting to think. All that aside, there were many different forms to choose from. First, there's all the different varieties of the form you've already seen. Look how cute this little guy is. There's also versions for kids in lower grades, like ones that are spaced out more or have happy and sad faces. They also have ballots for various numbers of candidates, and the subsequent results form. There's surveys, and those also have results forms to go with it. Then there's the combo forms. This one is what they call a mini essay book. Not only does it have 100 multiple choice questions, but it also has lines front and back for you to write an essay. I don't miss taking these tests, and I'm glad I never had to take one of these. This form is a little bit weird. The questions are upside down compared to the essay part, and instead of just saying to erase completely, they said you need to erase completely due to the unique marking positions on this form. Interesting. Anyway, the next one is 885-E, which not only has 100 multiple choice questions, but also matching. Each question has 3 rows of possible answers, so that's 15 possible answers. And there's not a lot of talk about this, so maybe it didn't get used much, but I think it would look like this where you match the word to its definition, stuff like that. But that's not all. There's also the short response part, which doesn't get graded by the machine. You just write in short answers here. This would be perfect for huge elementary school spelling tests. The next one immediately gave me flashbacks to the AP test. The part where you fill out your name and other info looks exactly the same. Say for your social security number, if it was 12345, you write that in the top, but then you also bubble in each digit. Now this form is technically compatible with my unit, but not the student demographic area. But to the left of it is a regular Scantron form that can be fed into my 888P+. And there's a note on the top that to use the student demographic section, I need a scanner that can specifically read them. I'm sure there are many other forms, but you get the idea. They have a lot of varieties, so it can match the different scenarios it can be useful. Now, as promised, let's take it apart. The machine is kind of big and heavy, so this could be interesting. There's this finger width gap around the perimeter of the machine where I can simply unscrew the cover, which is nice. It's pretty easy to service yourself considering you probably already had a contract with Scantron and you're supposed to have an authorized technician come out and fix things. Anyway, this thing is huge and I expect to see a lot of stuff in here. But no, there's a ton of empty space. All the brains live on this single board. The first chip that stood out to me is this Texas Instruments one that has the Scantron's model number on it and is dated June 1990. It's an EEPROM chip, which is storing the firmware for the 888P+. This Sharp one is 16K of RAM, this Rockwell one is a microprocessor, and these two Connexent ones seem to be the interface chips. And actually, Rockwell spun off Connexin as its own company in 1999, so when my unit was manufactured, they probably had a bunch of Rockwell processors left over. The only other thing that stands out on this board are these 7 transistors. There are also 7 pairs of wires leading off a header on the board labeled printer, and if you remember, the printed text had 7 rows of dots, so these transistors are likely turning on and off the individual dots on the printer. We'll look a little closer at that later, but that's cool. And that's about it for the brains. Very simple. Now for what you've actually been waiting for, the greater assembly. Everything that actually interacts with the test forms are bolted onto this big, thick piece of metal. And surprisingly, it's the only piece of metal. It's pretty heavy and empty inside, so you'd think the whole shell is metal, but nope, it's all plastic. It's not cheap, thin plastic though. I'll turn it on real quick, and the first thing you'll notice is a light bulb. There's a mask on the light that projects 6 individual squares onto this white strip. At the very bottom of that strip is a red ink roller, which is where those little ticks get printed, and there's a matching one up and to the left, which is where the test feedback gets printed, which is for the dot matrix printer. I was worried it used ink ribbons or something, but these rollers seem to last forever. You can buy replacement ones, but mine seems fine and I have no idea how old it is. You really don't have to worry about ink. What you do have to worry about is these belts. They will need replacement at some point, and it seems like a huge pain. I found a video of a guy repairing one of these, and he had to make his own belt because the exact size isn't readily available. The belt he had to replace was this one, which drives the first guide roller. Luckily, mine seems like it will last a little longer if I'm careful. It might have been replaced as recently as 2010 if this service record sticker is anything to go by. If you look super closely, you can see columns for date of service, employee number, and component. There are only 2 records, both for the PM component, and I'm not sure what PM stands for, but maybe it's that belt. Even though that belt is fine, I actually have a broken one too. This just fell out of the machine when I unboxed it, but everything seems to work fine without it. It turns out there's supposed to be another belt on the left which drives the last roller. This is the one that fully ejects the forms, but that's not something I need since I don't have that side tray anyway. But if this belt wasn't broken, it would make grading tests even faster because you wouldn't have to pick up the graded test before inserting another one. Now behind this is a bunch more stuff. The first thing that caught my eye is this fan. Why is the motor so big for just a fan? Well, it is an AC motor, so it's going to be beefy, but that motor also drives all the rollers. Basically, everything that moves in here is driven by the same motor. Now, this thing to the left of the fan is a printer. The same idea as a dot matrix. This would be called a 7-pin printer because there are 7 dots on the printhead. Each pin strikes the ink roller on the other side when it's needed, and as the page passes by, it's able to make complete characters. You can even see the imprint on the other side of the paper. In between the paper and the fan motor is this little solenoid that fires as soon as an incorrect answer is detected. That's what makes the little red mark on the bottom. I'll show you this in action soon. The last components in here make up the power supply. AC line power comes in through the plug on the back, and both hot and neutral go through this EMI filter. Then the hot line goes into this thing, then goes all the way up to that red switch on the front. So yes, the switch that you use to put the Scantron in program mode is really just switching live AC power. I thought I would at least control a relay or something, but no, your finger is very close to 120 volt. Then the power comes back down and goes into this absolutely massive transformer. I don't know what voltage this transformer is outputting, but regardless, it's making up a significant amount of weight in this machine, which is about 20 pounds. The output goes into the power supply board, and there are 4 wires going into the transformer, and I just can't see how that's wired up. 2 of them are the AC input from the wall, and the other 2 go to the motor. There's a chance the motor is having its voltage stepped down by the transformer, but I doubt it. It's rated for 120 volts. Also, as I was poking around in here, I realized why the fan is placed so far away from the other components. That's because the only reason it's there is to cool the AC motor itself. The motor gets pretty warm in operation, and I think it's the only component in here that warrants a fan, otherwise it could be passively cooled. Anyway, that thing I mentioned the live power goes into is actually a circuit breaker. After 2.5 amps, it will trip and there's a reset button mounted on the bottom. I didn't know this button existed until I googled the component and found pictures of it. I thought there's no way they did this, but here we are. Okay, should we look at this thing grading a test? First I'll feed the key in, then I'll feed in a test. This one has a few questions wrong. I actually just fed in a blank form with none of the answers filled out, so that means it registered every question as wrong and marked that as incorrect with a red tick along the bottom. Again, that's printed by the bottom roller and the solenoid on the back. Look at how fast it had to fire when I fed that test in. Even more impressive is the dot matrix printer. I couldn't get a good shot of it in action, but you can kind of see the little pins here. As the paper passes through, it pokes the paper with the appropriate patterns to make letters. I think it's amazing how fast all this happens. I can't believe it can grade a test in just about a second. That's 20 milliseconds per question. It's really accurate too. It didn't miss a single mark until I had this front lid open. There was sunlight beaming down on it, which was getting into the actual optical scanner and prevented it from getting a good reading. As long as you have the front cover on, it's very accurate. Speaking of which, I think it's time we finally talk about how it reads responses. As you saw before, there are a total of 6 squares of light that get projected on the page. There are also 6 light sensors, and pretty much all the time the light is getting reflected back into those sensors. The Scantron test page reflects light very well, but the graphite from a pencil doesn't. That's how it reads the marks. When it sees a dip in the reflected light, it registers a mark. Those black marks along the side of the test form also absorb light, and those are read by the 6th sensor, which is placed farther apart than the others. That's what's known as the timing track, and is actually very important. It's how the machine knows when the next question is coming up, and it helps keep everything aligned. You can have tests with various timings, but as long as the test and the key have the same timing, it won't reject the form. The longer black marks indicate the start and end of the test, and for the item analysis form there are extra black marks along the top so the machine knows what form was just inserted. Maybe it can trick it into thinking a regular form is an item analysis form? And yes, you can. I cut off the top of a regular form so this bigger black mark is lined up, then filled in the other 2 marks with pencil, and it printed the scores along the top just fine. It was spaced out a little more than the actual item analysis form, but I thought it was cool. Anyway, now that we know how it reads information, do we really need to use a number 2 pencil? People say it's not necessary, but I don't think anyone's willing to try it on a test that matters. So I have one that doesn't. I'll be filling it out with a variety of writing utensils. The first 5 will be standard number 2. The next 5 will still be number 2, but where I didn't bubble it in all the way. The next will be number 2, but it's way out of the bubbles. Then number 2 with partially erased marks. Then I'll have black pen, blue pen, red pen. We'll do Sharpie, highlighter, colored pencil, and crayon too, just for fun. And then I'm doing the forbidden, something frowned upon by students and teachers for decades. Something the Scantron Corporation doesn't want you to even think about doing. I'm using a number 4 pencil. Now let's take a look at the results. Our top one, the control, is fine as expected. The ones that were not all the way marked in worked, which is interesting, but the ones that were overfilled didn't. C and D both marked as incorrect. Interesting. The partially erased marks graded just fine, which is exactly why you need to make sure you erase completely, otherwise it'll read it as a mark. What didn't work was pen. Black, blue, and red pen all got marked as incorrect, which was not what I was expecting. I actually also expected red to maybe be different because it was close to infrared, and I saw some report on a Scantron using infrared specifically instead of incandescent, which is full spectrum, so I thought maybe that would have an effect on it, but no. All of the pen was marked wrong, and I think it's just because the pen has a shiny finish, so it was reflecting the light back into the sensor. Now Sharpie worked great because it just absorbed all the light. Highlighter and colored pencil did not. Highlighter obviously didn't work because it's barely there. Colored pencil I wasn't sure about, but it didn't work. Crayon didn't work, probably because it was shiny. And now let's look at the other pencils. The first one was number 4 pencil, and A and D were marked wrong, but I think it's because I wasn't able to erase the marks very well, so I ran another test through, and all of the marks were read correctly. This is all number 4. And then continuing on, number 6, number 8, and number 12 all worked just fine. So I guess it doesn't matter, at least for the 888P+, which pencil you use. And for those of you who haven't seen what these pencils look like, they actually look very similar, it's just it's different softness of the graphite. Here's number 4, 6, 8, and 12. So maybe older scanners would read these wrong, and that's why they were specifically saying number 2. Also, my teacher did completely lie about it aggressively rejecting my form if I used the wrong thing. It just marks it as incorrect. The only time it rejects a form is if it jams, and it's just the cute little beeper screaming for help. Now, one last thing I wanted to try is chapstick. I've heard a few things saying that if you coat the whole answer section in chapstick, it'll just mark them all as correct, which doesn't seem possible unless that completely made it think there wasn't a test form in there. I don't know. So let's try it out. And, well, the internet lied. It still marked them all as wrong, so don't try that, and it probably just makes the machine disgusting. Another question I have is, what's with this sticker? Did they really own the machines? In most cases, yes. They would actually loan schools the machine itself free of charge. The only catch is that you promise to only order forms from Scantron and that you spend at least $750 a year on forms. Nothing's free. So I can forgive them a little for being so insistent on the first-party forms because that's the only way they actually make money. They offered bulk discounts based on how much you spent on forms, the highest being a 32.5% discount for spending over $65,000. The program also includes free machine servicing or replacement along with training and support, and that's actually pretty cool if you had that volume of tests. You would have to give out a good amount of tests though. The 750 number comes from a 2019 contract with Fuck Your County Schools, and in the contract it lists the regular 882 forms as around $70 for 500 forms. So you'd have to buy over 5,000 forms to reach that number. I guess it's also incentive to use the Scantron machine. And if you weren't going to reach the number, or you just wanted to buy the machine outright, that seemed to be an option too. Beechwood High School wrote in an article in 2011 that listed its price as $2,600, but then you wouldn't get the free service and support. So the only question that remains is, how did we get here? I mean, it's obvious that automating test grading can have lots of benefits, but how far back did this go? Pretty far, actually. What you saw in this video was an optical mark reader, or OMR, where it optically checks the marked answers. But this is just a subset of the greater mark sense technology. The first one that actually read marks seems to be invented by Reynold B. Johnson in his basement. In the late 1920s, schools started giving out SAT tests, which is one of the standardized tests in the United States, and in 1931 he made an automatic test grader that used little pieces of wire to sense marks. The graphite used in pencils were conductive, and the machine would use that to sense if something was marked. He brought the design to IBM, and him and other people at IBM made this into the IBM 805 test scoring machine. The first optical mark sensing machine was credited to Everett Franklin Lindquist, who filed a patent in 1955. IBM also developed an optical mark sensing machine and filed a patent 2 years later, and both of those were used for scoring tests, but also for other uses like computerizing credit history data. They would mark forms with someone's credit history and then feed it into the IBM scanner, which would then print out punch cards that then they could feed into the IBM mainframe. That's crazy. The main difference with all of these scanners is that they wanted to make their money by selling the scanning devices. But in 1972, Michael Sokolsky and William Sanders teamed up to form the Scantron Corporation, and their model was completely different. They would sell you an inexpensive scanner, or even give it to you for free, and then make their money off of the forms. The barrier of entry was much lower, and it was a success. This was a patent filed in 1972, and you can see the similarities. The way it worked was largely the same as well. This patent is the only information I can find on the first model, by the way, but it describes why Scantron was revolutionary. According to the patent, past test scoring machines were nowhere near as flexible. The test had to have a certain number of possible answers and a certain number of questions, but the Scantron allows you to choose these on the fly. Another problem that past scanners had was how it stored the answer key. One approach was to feed both an answer key and a test form at the same time, and it would have to be read in perfect unison, which was tedious and error-prone. Another approach was to store answers on a magnetic drum, which was what Mr. Lindquist did on the first OMR, but the patent says that adding a drum adds more complexity and cost. So Scantron used more modern RAM for this. Another innovation was not having to switch into grading mode. With the Scantron, the answer key has a unique mark to indicate that it's a key, and the machine is just ready to grade tests as soon as a key is fed in. But the other units you had to switch manually, and then you could forget and then end up marking things wrong or whatever. So all that, plus automatic error marking and score printing, along with averaging scores, made this Scantron a success. This machine was a first of its kind and was much cheaper than the others, or even free, and was so simple to use. Except that it might not have been a first of its kind. In my search for images on early Scantrons, I came across this one. The image description is, student Ken Rovai buys a Scantron sheet from Kitty Martell in the campus bookstore in 1969. The Board of Trustees purchased an Automata 450 test score in 1969. This was the first time tests were graded automatically. So while this looks like a Scantron form, it's definitely not. The person who digitized it probably just called it a Scantron, similar to how people call tissues Kleenex. And this was definitely not the first time tests had been graded automatically, but I assume it meant for the school. Anyway, this is from 1969, 3 years before Scantron was even founded, but it seems to have a similar business model. That picture came from the Oak Leaf, Santa Rosa Junior College's newspaper, and the student is purchasing a form for 5 cents, just like the Scantron forms which can be purchased by students. Now, the business model wasn't the exact same. The university still had to buy the machine up front for $2,000, which is about $18,000 in today's money, but the machine operated the same way. The only real difference is that it would put a purple asterisk where the correct answer should have been. According to the patent, it was a first of its kind to do this. Yes, I was able to find a patent for the machine, which is the only concrete information I have on it. The patent also says it's very simple to use and doesn't require special training. I wish I had a picture of the machine, but the best I've got is the image in the patent, which is just a big box. You feed in a stack of forms and it spits out a stack of forms. The typewriter here is used to represent the record sheet, which is basically a report of all the graded tests, which is supposed to look like this. The test form itself is supposed to look like this, and it's very similar to a Scantron, except for this area to the left of the answers, which I'm not sure what it's for. The picture of the student purchasing the form didn't have those marks, and later patents didn't have those, so maybe it was just an initial testing thing, I don't know. And this might be the only look at an Automata form, and look how similar it is. There's timing tracks and even true-false labels for the first 2 columns. So the Automata company was making very similar systems to Scantron 3 years before they did. Scantron's patents actually cite multiple of their patents. It's interesting to think there could have been a world without Scantron if Automata had been more of a success. I think they just missed the mark by not selling the machines for cheap or having a lending program. The barrier of entry was still too high. They weren't a complete failure though. Apparently they were used for quite some time in other universities and colleges before Santa Rosa Junior College got theirs. There's also at least one of them still floating around. There's an auction sheet from a public school district in Lewiston, Minnesota that lists one Automata 450 sold. So if you have this machine, please share some information on it. I'd like to know more. In a 1968 edition of Computers and Automation, for some reason Automata was mentioned, so they might have done more than test scorers, but then again, that was the only reason they were mentioned. Their building is still around, but likely hasn't been occupied by them for a very long time. The founder was Leo Lawrence Azure Jr., who I can't find credited in any of the mentions of test scores. Feel free to edit a Wikipedia article and include him. His obituary does confirm that he founded Automata in 1964, a company that pioneered the application of optical recognition technology for use in automated test scoring. And they really did. He ended up selling the company in 1974 and started other companies. Okay, back to Scantron. Their machines gained widespread adoption by the 80s, and machines like mine, the 888P Plus, are incredibly common. eBay is flooded by them, and people actually buy them. Multiple of the ones I had saved had sold by the time I got around to buying it. They have newer models like the Scantron Score, which is operationally the same as my 888P Plus, but it's smaller and has an LCD screen to guide you through the grading process. It even has optional software that you can import the test data into for further analysis. Their Insight TM suite even grades up to 15,000 sheets per hour. That's slightly over 4 tests per second. Now, unfortunately, Scantrons have seen a decline in use, or maybe that's fortunate depending on how you look at it. These paper tests can be pretty tedious to fill out. Not only that, but a lot of schools now hand out laptops to every student, so having them take tests online is practical now. There are special browsers that hopefully lock down the device so cheating is harder. My teachers use Microsoft Forms a surprising amount, but that's besides the point. If you have good testing software, it can even tell you the time it took people to answer individual questions and give you more information than Scantron ever could. There are even apps now that replicate a Scantron test, but you just use your phone. You can print out the forms on the staff laserjet printer instead of buying them, and scanning them is sometimes free. Even higher stakes tests like those from College Board are transitioning to digital, and yes, I'm aware that basically no one likes College Board. But the SAT seems to be online only, and most of the AP tests are either hybrid or fully online. It makes sense in 2026, but it's weird to think that the era of opening your AP test packet might be coming to an end. When you are ready, proceed to break the seal. I can't find any information on how those AP tests were graded. They did look similar to Scantron, and they might have had to deal with them at some point. The scanners they use are more advanced than mine and probably a lot faster. Anyway, I was surprised to see a lot of articles talking about how Scantron tests are in decline. I saw one from Texas Tech University announcing their IT department wouldn't provide support on them, but you can feel free to keep using them and troubleshoot it yourself. It's weird to think that some kids will never have to take a Scantron test. For something so seemingly boring on the outside, it made a big impact, especially in the United States. 98 of the top 100 school districts use Scantron. The National Spelling Bee uses them too, and they are even used outside of education. For example, the 2002 Winter Olympics used them. The social impact is huge too. If you mention Scantron to an adult in the US, there's a decent chance they'll know what you're talking about. Even The Simpsons featured a Scantron test. This image has circulated around a bit, and you can find it yourself on BuzzFeed's 21 Hilarious Scantron Memes page. But this came from Season 4, Episode 10 of The Simpsons. Okay, I think that's all I have to say about Scantron. I got curious one day and did a little research and found that there weren't many videos on the subject. Maybe that's for a good reason, but I guess we'll see. I think it was pretty interesting though, and if you made it this far, I imagine you think it's interesting too. I'm trying to make more videos like this, though not necessarily on school equipment, and if you'd like to see more, consider supporting me on Patreon. These people are amazing, and their support lets me take a risk on a video like this. I'd love to have your support so I can continue to grow the channel and not have to take on sponsorships or put mid-roll ads on the video. I'll have that linked below. Thank you for watching.